She poured his coffee every single morning for 2 years and never once knew his name. He owned half the block her diner was standing on and let her believe he was just another tired man in a cheap suit. His assistant knew exactly who he was and exactly what she wanted. And she had already decided, a waitress would never be allowed to take him from her. What happens next left one woman fighting to walk again. And a stack of pancakes.
She refilled his coffee cup for 2 years straight and never once asked his name. What she didn't know was that the quiet man in the corner booth owned the building her diner was standing in, and that the woman who guarded his calendar had already decided, in a place deep and dark inside herself, that a waitress would never be allowed to take him from her. Nobody at that diner saw what was coming. Not the $4 that started it. Not the birthday that changed everything. And not the car that came out of nowhere on a quiet street, driven by someone none of them ever suspected until it was almost too late. Stay until the end, because what happens to her is not what you think. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Maya Bennett had been pouring coffee at Ruth's Diner since she was 19 years old. Standing in the same booth section her mother had worked for 2 decades before her knees finally gave out under her. The diner sat on a quiet corner in Savannah, Georgia, wedged between a hardware store and a shuttered bookshop, and it had clawed its way through 3 recessions, 2 hurricanes, and a pandemic on nothing but biscuits, gravy, and the kind of regulars who treated the staff like blood. Maya's mother, Dorothy, used to say a diner is the last honest place left in America, because nobody walks in pretending to be something they're not. They come in tired, hungry, and stripped down to who they really are, and that is exactly how Maya learned to treat every person who walked through that door, whether they tipped in quarters or $100 bills. For 6 months, a quiet man had been coming in 3 mornings a week, and something about him unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. He always took the corner booth by the window. He always ordered black coffee and wheat toast. He never once looked at his phone, never rushed her, never made her feel invisible the way some customers did without even trying. He said thank you every single time she topped off his cup, and he said it like it cost him something to mean it. She didn't know his name. She told herself she'd stopped wondering. But some mornings her chest tightened a little when the door opened and it wasn't him. One gray Tuesday, with rain hammering the windows so hard the whole diner smelled like wet pavement and burnt coffee, a young mother came in with 2 kids in tow, exhausted, apologizing before she'd even ordered. Her card kept declining at the register, and she was short by $4 for a stack of pancakes and 2 small milks. Maya covered it without a second thought, straight out of her own tip jar, the way her mother had done 1,000 times before her. Her hands moving before her mind had even finished deciding. She didn't notice the man in the corner booth watching every second of it over the rim of his coffee cup, saying nothing, forgetting nothing. The next morning there was an envelope tucked under his saucer. Inside was $200 in cash and a note in tight, deliberate handwriting that read, "For the next person who is a little short, keep the change and don't make a thing of it." Maya's hands were shaking a little as she read it, half laughing, half something else she couldn't quite place, and by the time she looked up to ask him about it, he was already gone, his cup empty, his newspaper folded exactly the way he always left it, like a man erasing his own footprints. It was Walter, an older regular who came in every Sunday for the meatloaf special, who finally told her who the stranger really was. His name was Daniel Cole, and he wasn't just some quiet man who liked black coffee. He ran Cole Development, the company that had spent 3 years quietly buying up half the historic buildings on that block, one silent transaction at a time, including, as it turned out, the very building her diner was standing inside of. Maya's stomach dropped hard at that. Not because it changed how he treated her, but because it meant she'd been living inside a story she didn't know the shape of, and somewhere out there someone else already did. What Maya could not have known was that 30 minutes away, on the 14th floor of Cole Development's downtown headquarters, a woman named Vanessa Reyes had spent 6 years watching Daniel the way a person watches a fault line, waiting, with a kind of dread she never let herself name, for the ground to finally move. Vanessa was his executive assistant, and she had built her entire identity around being indispensable to him. She knew his coffee order before he did some mornings. She quietly blocked off his late wife's birthday on his calendar every year without ever being asked. She had convinced herself, slowly and completely, that devotion this total had to be repaid eventually, that a man like Daniel would look up one day and finally see her standing right where she'd always been. Instead, she started hearing him mention a diner, then a waitress, then once, almost under his breath while reviewing a property file, a name that landed in her chest like a struck match. Maya. She said nothing. She simply filed it away, the way she filed everything, and told herself it didn't mean what some sharp, cold part of her already knew it meant. Daniel started coming to the diner more, sometimes twice in a single morning, and eventually he asked Maya to dinner, plainly, the way a man asks when he has already decided something and is only waiting for her to catch up. She said yes out of curiosity, bracing for 2 hours of a wealthy man performing his own importance at her. Instead, she sat across from someone who asked about her mother's arthritis, who wanted to know what she'd study if money were never in the equation, who listened to her describe the bakery she dreamed of without once offering to simply buy the dream for her. He asked what her first menu would look like, and she found herself sketching it on a napkin before dessert arrived, hands moving faster than she meant them to. Maya was seeing someone at the time, a junior banker named Marcus Doyle, and when she mentioned, almost carelessly, that she'd had dinner with a client from the diner, he let out a laugh with no warmth in it at all and told her not to get any ideas, that men like that married women who came for money, not women who smelled like maple syrup at the end of a 10-hour shift. It wasn't the first comment like it in their 2 years together. It was simply the first one she let land all the way, and something in her chest went cold and still and final. Vanessa's unraveling moved slower, and far more dangerously, than anyone around her could have guessed. She began intercepting small things, a florist's confirmation, a message meant for Daniel's eyes only. When Maya came by the office to drop off a thank you card after Daniel quietly arranged her mother's physical therapy, Vanessa told her he was unavailable and never breathed a word of the visit to him. Daniel found out weeks later, by pure accident, and something small and permanent cracked in 6 years of trust, though at the time he told himself it was nothing, a scheduling slip, forgivable. Maya's birthday fell on a Saturday in October, and Daniel had spent nearly a month planning it in total secrecy. Flowers arrived at her mother's porch before sunrise. A private boat cruise along a coastline turned gold by the early light. Lunch behind an unmarked door where the chef came out personally for every course. A small chartered plane lifting them over the city as the sun dropped and the skyline caught fire with color. The kind of light that makes a person feel they've stepped clean out of their own life into someone else's. Somewhere over the marsh, watching the color drain from the sky, Daniel told her plainly that he intended to marry her one day, that he wasn't asking for an answer yet, only wanted her to carry the truth of how he felt instead of wondering. She told him honestly she needed time. He told her, without a flicker of impatience, that he had all the time in the world. 3 days later, a delivery invoice crossed Vanessa's desk by mistake, and something in her didn't just crack this time. It gave way completely. 6 years of patience collapsed into something with no name, something that no longer asked to be loved and only wanted, with total clarity, for the fantasy in front of her to disappear. 2 weeks after the birthday, Maya went by Daniel's office to return a jacket he'd left behind. Vanessa told her he was in a meeting and let her walk right back out the door without a word to him. Walking to the bus stop as the evening light went thin and blue, Maya heard the engine before she understood what it meant, and then there was only impact, and then there was nothing at all. She woke up in a hospital bed with a shattered leg, a concussion, and a blank space where the accident should have been, only the sound of it looping in her mind with no face attached to it. The surgery would cost more than her family had ever held at one time in their lives. Her mother sat in the waiting room running numbers on the back of a hospital pamphlet that never once worked out, until Maya's aunt finally took the phone from her hands and called Daniel herself. He was there within the hour, and the bills vanished quietly, without ceremony, without a single word that made her family feel small for asking. What no one in that waiting room knew yet was that the answer to who had been behind the wheel was already sitting on the 14th floor of Cole Development, answering phones, running his calendar, smiling at him across the same desk she'd smiled across for 6 straight years. It took weeks of pulled traffic footage and a detective named Adale, patient and quiet, to trace the vehicle back to a registration that made his stomach turn cold when he read the name attached to it. When 2 officers walked into Cole Development to bring Vanessa in for questioning, the entire 14th floor went dead silent, phones ringing on empty desks, no one daring to move. Daniel learned, in the space of one short, airless conversation, that the woman he had trusted with his life for 6 years had lied to his face, twice, about Maya coming to see him, and that the second lie had very nearly ended a life over a jealousy he had never once seen simmering an arm's length away from him every single day. Maya spent 5 months in physical therapy relearning how to walk without favoring the leg that had shattered in 3 places. Daniel showed up almost every day, sometimes just to sit beside her in silence while she worked through the pain, never once raising the question from the boat. Marcus came a handful of times early on, flowers in hand, apologies rehearsed, and then simply stopped coming at all, and neither of them ever spoke of it again. The day Maya finally walked into Daniel's office on her own 2 feet, no cane, no one steadying her arm, she found him standing at the window the way he used to sit with his coffee, still and unreadable. She told him her answer was yes, that she'd needed the time not because she doubted him but because she needed to know she was choosing him and not simply the easiest escape from a hard life. He told her that was the only yes he had ever wanted. They married the following spring at the edge of the same marsh where he'd first told her the truth of how he felt, string lights strung through the oaks, her mother crying through the entire ceremony from the front row. Dorothy retired for good not long after. The bakery Maya had once only dared to sketch on a napkin opened 18 months later, paid for by a loan she insisted on carrying herself, because some things, she told him, a woman has to build with her own 2 hands, no matter how many doors are already open in front of her. Vanessa pled guilty to reckless endangerment and leaving the scene, and served 14 months. But here is the part almost nobody talks about, the part that never made it into any article about the case. In her final interview before her release, when asked if she had any regrets, she paused for a long moment and said only that she wasn't the only one at that company who had watched Daniel Cole a little too closely for a little too long, and that some secrets, she said, were still sitting quietly in that building, waiting for someone to finally notice them the way she once had. She never explained what she meant. She was never asked again. And somewhere on the 14th floor of Cole Development, life simply went on, phones ringing, calendars filling, nobody looking twice at the woman who answered them now.